The afternoon sun felt warm on her skin as she sat at the small metal table outside the cafe. 28-year-old Sophie loved this spot. It was her favorite place in the whole city, tucked away on a quiet corner in Los Angeles where she could watch people walk by and lose herself in her own little world. She took a sip of her vanilla latte, the sweetness making her smile. In front of her lay her sketchbook, filled with drawings of flowers, buildings, and the faces of strangers she'd seen around town. Drawing made her happy. It always had ever since she was a little girl. Her mother used to say she had a gift for seeing beauty in everything. Sophie had Down syndrome, but that never stopped her from living her life the way she wanted. She had a job at the bookstore down the street, working 3 days a week. She had friends. She had dreams. And right now she had this perfect moment with her coffee and her art. The cafe was busier than usual. People chatted at tables around her, the sound of laughter and conversation mixing with the soft music playing from inside. Sophie liked the energy. It made her feel part of something bigger even when she was sitting alone. She picked up her pencil and started sketching a small bird she'd seen earlier that morning. Her hand moved slowly across the page, careful and deliberate. She stuck her tongue out slightly as she concentrated, the way she always did when she was really focused on something. That's when she heard it. Laughter. But not the kind that makes you want to join in, the kind that makes your stomach drop. At the table next to hers, 3 young men sat together. They looked like they were in college, maybe 20 or 21 years old. They had that careless confidence that comes from never having to think twice about how the world sees you. One of them, wearing a backward baseball cap, nudged his friend and said something under his breath. Sophie couldn't hear the exact words, but she heard her friend laugh in response. Then all 3 of them were looking at her. She tried to ignore it. She'd learned over the years that sometimes people stared, sometimes they whispered. Her mother had taught her to hold her head high and not let it bother her. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. "Dude, look at how she holds her pencil," one of them said, not even trying to keep his voice down anymore. Sophie's hand trembled slightly. She pressed the pencil harder against the paper, trying to focus on her bird drawing. "Just finish the bird. Just keep drawing." "Bro, is she for real right now?" Another one chimed in, more laughter. Louder this time. Sophie's eyes started to sting. She blinked rapidly, determined not to cry. Not here, not in front of everyone. She'd been looking forward to this afternoon all week. This was supposed to be her happy time, her peaceful moment away from everything else. "I wonder if she even knows what she's drawing," the third one said, and they all cracked up like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. Around them, other people at the cafe started to notice. An older woman at a nearby table glanced over with a frown. A man reading a newspaper lowered it slightly, his eyes moving between Sophie and the 3 bullies. But nobody said anything. They just looked uncomfortable and then looked away. That was almost worse than the bullying itself. Sophie could feel their eyes on her, could sense their discomfort, but nobody stepped in. Nobody told these guys to stop. They all just pretended like it wasn't happening. One of the young men pulled out his phone. He pointed it at Sophie and started recording, making exaggerated faces at the camera. His friends leaned in, grinning like they were part of some hilarious joke. "Yo, this is going to get so many likes," the one with the phone said. Sophie's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to be anywhere but here. Her hand holding the pencil was shaking so badly now that she couldn't draw anymore. She set it down and wrapped her arms around herself. "Oh, look, she's getting upset," one of them said in a mocking baby voice. "Don't be sad." The cruelty in his tone made Sophie's throat tighten. Tears finally spilled down her cheeks and she quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand. She hated that they could see her crying. Hated that they had this power over her. Why were people like this? What had she ever done to them? Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "Hold your head high, Mia. You're perfect just as you are. Don't let anyone make you feel small." But right now, Sophie felt smaller than she ever had. The joy she'd felt just minutes ago had completely evaporated, replaced by shame and humiliation that burned in her chest. One of the guys stood up from his table. He walked a few steps toward Sophie, stumbling and swaying in an exaggerated way, pretending to be uncoordinated. His friends howled with laughter behind him. "Look, I can do it too," he announced proudly, like he'd just performed some great comedy routine. Sophie clutched her sketchbook to her chest. She wanted to run, but her legs felt frozen. She wanted to scream at them to tell them how cruel they were being, but the words wouldn't come. They stuck in her throat like stones. A few more people in the cafe were watching now. A woman covered her mouth, clearly upset by what she was seeing. A teenage girl pulled out her phone, but Sophie couldn't tell if she was going to help or just record like the bullies were doing. The guy who had stood up was now making ridiculous gestures with his arms, mimicking what he apparently thought Sophie looked like. His performance was met with more laughter from his table. "Dude, stop, you're killing me." One of his friends gasped between laughs, but they weren't stopping. If anything, they were getting more confident, more bold. The lack of consequences seemed to fuel them. Nobody was telling them no. Nobody was standing up to say this was wrong. Sophie's vanilla latte sat forgotten on the table, growing cold. Her beautiful sketch of the bird remained unfinished. All she could think about was how much she wanted this moment to end. She'd been through stuff like this before. Middle school had been rough. High school had its moments. Even as an adult, she sometimes encountered people who treated her like she was less than human. Like she was something to laugh at instead of someone to know. But knowing it happened didn't make it easier. Each time felt just as painful as the first. The guy finally sat back down with his friends, all of them still chuckling and replaying the video on the phone. They seemed completely unaware or uncaring of the pain they'd caused. To them, this was just entertainment. A funny story they'd tell later. To Sophie, it was a reminder that the world could be incredibly cruel. She took a shaky breath and looked down at her sketchbook. The unfinished bird stared back at her. She'd drawn it with hope and happiness. Now it just looked sad. Sophie was about to gather her things and leave when something changed in the air around her. She couldn't quite explain it, but she felt it. A shift. A presence. The bullies must have felt it too, because their laughter suddenly died down. Someone was standing behind the three young men. Sophie couldn't see who it was from where she sat, but she could tell by the way the bullies' faces changed. Their smiles faded. Their cocky attitudes seemed to shrink right before her eyes. The tallest of the three turned around in his seat, and his jaw actually dropped open. His friends followed his gaze, twisting in their chairs to see who had just walked up behind them. Sophie wiped her tears and looked up, trying to see what had caused such a sudden change. Through her blurry vision, she could make out a tall figure wearing a dark motorcycle jacket, jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low. The man wore sunglasses even though he'd just come from inside the cafe. There was something about the way he carried himself. Calm, steady, like he didn't need to raise his voice or make a scene to command attention. He just had it naturally. "What's so funny?" the man asked. His voice was quiet but firm, the kind of voice that made you listen. The guy in the backward baseball cap stammered. Nothing, man. We were just, hanging out." "Hanging out," the man repeated slowly like he was testing the words. "That's what you call it?" The second bully, the one who'd been recording on his phone, quickly shoved his phone into his pocket. "We weren't doing anything wrong. Really." The man's tone stayed even, but there was something underneath it. Something that made it clear he wasn't buying their excuses. "Because from where I was sitting, it looked like you were harassing that young woman over there." He nodded toward Sophie, and suddenly all eyes were on her again. But this time it felt different. This time someone was on her side. Sophie's heart was still racing, but now for a different reason. Someone had noticed. Someone cared enough to say something. The third bully tried to laugh it off. "Dude, we were just messing around. It's not that serious, not that serious," the man said. He took off his sunglasses, and that's when Sophie saw his face clearly. Even from her table, even with her tear-filled eyes, she recognized him. She'd seen him in movies, on posters. Her mother loved his films. It was Keanu Reeves. The bullies recognized him too. You could see the exact moment it clicked in their heads. Their faces went from defensive to shocked to embarrassed in about 3 seconds flat. "Oh man," the one with the backward cap muttered under his breath. Keanu looked at each of them in turn. "Let me ask you something. Do you have sisters, mothers, friends who are women?" The question hung in the air. One of them nodded slowly. "How would you feel if someone treated them the way you just treated her?" Keanu continued. "If someone mocked them, recorded them without permission, made them cry in public just for existing?" Silence. None of them had an answer for that. "We didn't mean anything by it," one finally mumbled, but even he didn't sound convinced by his own words. "You didn't mean anything," Keanu repeated, "but you did something. You hurt someone. You made her feel less than human for your own entertainment, and you thought that was okay because nobody was stopping you. Sophie watched this whole exchange with wide eyes. She couldn't believe what was happening. This famous actor, this person who could be anywhere else in the world, was standing up for her. A complete stranger was defending her when nobody else would. Around the cafe, other customers had stopped their conversations. Everyone was watching now. The older woman who'd frowned earlier had a small smile on her face. The man with the newspaper had set it down completely, paying full attention. One of the bullies tried a different approach. "Look, we're sorry, okay? We'll leave her alone." "You'll leave her alone," Keanu said. "That's the bare minimum of human decency. That's not something to be proud of." He paused, letting his words sink in. Then he added something that Sophie would remember forever. "She's a person, a human being with feelings, dreams, and dignity. She deserves the same respect you'd want for yourself. Actually, she deserves more respect than you've shown you're capable of giving." The weight of those words seemed to crush whatever was left of the bully's bravado. They looked down at their table, at their hands, anywhere but at Keanu or Sophie. "I think you should go," Keanu said simply. It wasn't aggressive or angry, just a clear statement of fact. The three young men didn't argue. They gathered their things quickly, shoving phones and wallets into their pockets. As they stood to leave, Keanu added one more thing. "And delete that video. Whatever you recorded, it's gone. Understand?" The one who'd been filming nodded rapidly, pulling out his phone right there and deleting the footage while Keanu watched. The others just wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. As they walked away, heads down and silent, a few people in the cafe actually started clapping. It started with the older woman, then spread to others. Not a huge celebration, but a clear show of approval for what Keanu had done. Sophie sat frozen at her table, her sketchbook still pressed against her chest. She didn't know what to do. Should she say something? Thank him? Wave? Before she could decide, Keanu turned and looked directly at her. His expression softened immediately. All the firmness he'd shown the bullies melted away, replaced by genuine warmth. He walked over to her table, and Sophie's breath caught in her throat. She'd never been this close to a famous person before, but more than that, she'd never had someone stand up for her like this. "Hi," he said gently, stopping a respectful distance from her table. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that. Nobody deserves to be treated that way." Sophie managed a small nod. Her voice felt stuck again, but this time it wasn't from fear or sadness. It was from overwhelming emotion. "I saw you drawing," Keanu continued, gesturing to her sketchbook. "Would you mind if I sat down for a minute?" "I'd love to see your work if you're comfortable with that." Sophie blinked. Was this really happening? Was Keanu Reeves asking to sit with her and look at her drawings? She nodded again, this time more enthusiastically. She even managed to whisper, "Okay." Keanu smiled, a real genuine smile that reached his eyes, and pulled out the chair across from her. As he sat down, Sophie noticed that other people in the cafe were trying not to stare too obviously. Phones were coming out, but they were being discreet about it. This was Los Angeles, after all. Celebrity sightings weren't that unusual. But what was unusual was watching someone famous treat a regular person with such care and respect. That's what people were really watching. Not just a celebrity, but a kind human being. "I'm Keanu," he said, extending his hand across the table. Sophie shook it with her small hand. "I'm Sophie," she said quietly, finally finding her voice. "It's nice to meet you, Sophie." He said her name like it mattered. Like she mattered. "Now tell me about your art. What were you working on?" Sophie looked down at her sketchbook, at the unfinished bird she'd been drawing before everything went wrong. Slowly, carefully, she opened it and turned it so Keanu could see. "A bird," she said softly. "A bird," Keanu repeated, leaning forward to get a better look. "That's beautiful. Look at the detail in the feathers." And just like that, Sophie felt the tightness in her chest begin to ease. The tears dried on her cheeks. The horrible feeling of shame started to fade away, because someone saw her, really saw her, not as someone to mock or pity, but as a person worth knowing. Sophie's hands were still shaking a little as she held her sketchbook, but now it was a different kind of nervous. The good kind. The kind you feel when something unexpectedly wonderful is happening, and you're afraid you might wake up and realize it was all a dream. Keanu leaned closer to study her drawing of the bird. He wasn't just glancing at it to be polite. He was really looking. His eyes moved over the page, taking in every line in detail. "You've got talent," he said. And it didn't sound like something people say just to be nice. It sounded real. "How long have you been drawing?" "Since I was little," Sophie answered, her voice getting a bit stronger. "My mom gave me my first sketchbook when I was 6. I filled it up in 2 weeks." Keanu laughed. A warm sound that made Sophie smile despite everything that had just happened. 2 weeks? That's impressive. You must have been drawing nonstop." "I was," Sophie said, and she couldn't help but grin at the memory. "My mom said I drew on everything. The walls, the furniture, even on my own arms." "Sounds like you found your passion early," Keanu said. He looked up from the sketchbook to meet her eyes. "That's a gift. A lot of people spend their whole lives trying to figure out what makes them happy." Sophie nodded. Drawing did make her happy. It always had. Even today, even after what those guys had done, she'd still come here to draw. "That had to mean something. Can I see more?" Keanu asked, gesturing to the sketchbook. Sophie hesitated for just a moment, then flipped back through the pages. There were drawings of flowers she'd seen in the park. A sketch of her cat, Mr. Whiskers, sleeping in a sunbeam. A portrait of her mother that she'd worked on for 3 days straight. "This is your mom?" Keanu asked, pointing to the portrait. "Yeah," Sophie said proudly. "That's my mama. She's my best friend." "She's lucky to have you," Keanu said. "And you clearly love her a lot." "I can see it in how carefully you drew this." Sophie felt her chest swell with warmth. Nobody had ever talked about her art like this before. Sure, her family always said nice things, but they were her family. They had to be nice. This was different. This was someone who didn't have to care but did anyway. Around them, the cafe had returned to a somewhat normal buzz of activity. But Sophie could still feel people watching. Not in a bad way, though. More like they were witnessing something special and didn't want to miss it. The older woman from earlier walked past their table on her way out. She paused and looked at Keanu with appreciation in her eyes. "Thank you for doing that," she said quietly. "The world needs more people like you." Keanu nodded humbly. "Thank you, but anyone could have done it. Anyone should have." The woman smiled at Sophie before leaving, and Sophie gave her a small wave. "She's right, you know," Sophie said after the woman was gone. "Not everyone would have helped me like you did." Keanu's expression grew more serious. "That's a problem, isn't it? It shouldn't be special or unusual to treat people with respect. It should be normal." Sophie thought about all the times she'd been stared at, whispered about, or excluded. She thought about the people who looked away instead of helping. "But it's not normal," she said softly. "Not for everyone." "No," Keanu agreed. "Not yet. But maybe it can be, if more people speak up when they see something wrong. If we all decide that kindness matters more than being comfortable." He picked up a napkin and gestured to Sophie's pencil. "May I?" She handed it to him, curious. Keanu started sketching on the napkin. He wasn't as skilled as Sophie, but he drew with focus and care. After a minute, he turned the napkin around to show her. It was a simple, smiley face, but underneath it he'd written, "Keep creating. The world needs your art." Sophie's eyes filled with tears again, but these were completely different from the ones she'd cried earlier. These were happy tears. "Thank you," she whispered, taking the napkin like it was made of gold. "No," Keanu said gently. "Thank you. For sharing your art with me, for being brave enough to be yourself in a world that isn't always kind." A waiter approached their table tentatively. "Excuse me, sorry to interrupt. Can I get you anything?" "Coffee, water?" Keanu looked at Sophie. "What do you say? Want another latte?" "My treat." Sophie's first instinct was to say no. She didn't want to be a burden, but something about the way Keanu asked made her feel like it was genuinely okay to say yes. "Okay," she said. "Another vanilla latte would be nice." 2 vanilla lattes, Keanu told the waiter with a smile. As the waiter walked away, Sophie noticed him pull out his phone. Probably texting someone about who was sitting in the cafe. She'd seen enough movies and TV shows to know that's what people did when they spotted celebrities. "Does that bother you?" Sophie asked, nodding toward the waiter. "People always taking pictures and talking about you." Keanu shrugged. "Sometimes. But I chose this life, you know? And if people are talking about today about what happened here, maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe it reminds someone else to stand up next time they see something wrong." "I wish I could have stood up for myself," Sophie admitted. "But I got so scared. I couldn't move or speak or anything. Hey, Keanu said, his voice firm but kind. Don't do that. Don't blame yourself for how you reacted to people being cruel. You didn't do anything wrong. They did. But I just sat there, Sophie said. You were in shock. That's normal. That's human. Keanu leaned forward. Standing up to bullies is hard, Sophie. Even for adults. Even for people who look tough and confident. Fear is real and it's powerful. You're not weak for feeling it. Sophie let those words sink in. She'd been beating herself up ever since those guys started laughing at her, wondering why she couldn't be braver, stronger, different. But maybe she didn't need to be different. Maybe she was okay just as she was. My mom tells me I'm perfect the way I am, Sophie said. But sometimes it's hard to believe that when people treat you like you're not. Your mom is absolutely right, Keanu said. And I know it's hard to believe when people are cruel. But Sophie, those guys, they're the ones with the problem, not you. They're the ones who need to change, not you. The waiter returned with their lattes, setting them down carefully. Sophie wrapped her hands around the warm cup, grateful for the comfort it brought. Can I tell you something? Keanu asked. Sophie nodded. I've met thousands of people in my life. Maybe more. Famous people, powerful people, rich people. And you want to know what I've learned? What? Sophie asked, genuinely curious. The measure of a person isn't their fame or their money or their power. It's how they treat others, especially when nobody's watching. It's whether they create more kindness in the world or more pain. He paused. You create beauty. You share your art with the world. Those guys back there, they just create misery. So who do you think is really winning? Sophie had never thought about it that way before. She'd always felt like the victim, the one who lost when people bullied her. But maybe Keanu was right. Maybe she was winning just by being herself, by refusing to become bitter or mean despite how people treated her. I like that, Sophie said, smiling for real now. I never thought about it like that. Well, now you can, Keanu said, raising his latte cup. To creating beauty in a world that needs more of it. Sophie clinked her cup against his, feeling something shift inside her. The afternoon had started terrible and scary, but somehow it was turning into something else entirely. Something she'd remember forever. They sat there talking for what felt like both minutes and hours at the same time. Sophie had completely forgotten about the bullies, about her tears, about everything except this moment. This conversation with someone who actually listened to what she had to say. Keanu asked her about her job at the bookstore, and Sophie lit up talking about it. She told him about how she organized the children's section, how she knew where every book was located, and how kids would sometimes ask specifically for her help because she always found exactly what they were looking for. You know what that tells me? Keanu said. That you're good at your job. That you're valued. Those kids trust you, and trust isn't something you can fake. Sophie beamed with pride. She loved her job, even though some people had told her mother she'd never be able to work. Those people were wrong. She showed up every shift on time, worked hard, and customers liked her. Her manager had even given her a raise last year. Do you ever think about selling your art? Keanu asked, nodding at her sketchbook. Sophie's smile faded a little. I don't know. I've thought about it, but I wouldn't know how. And what if nobody wants to buy it? Sophie, look at me, Keanu said, waiting until she met his eyes. That fear you're feeling? That what if nobody likes it fear. Every artist feels that. Every single one. Even the famous ones. Even the ones with paintings in museums. Really? Sophie asked, finding that hard to believe. Really, Keanu confirmed. I'm an actor, right? And before every movie comes out, I wonder if people will hate it. If they'll think I did a terrible job. That fear never goes away. But you know what? You can't let it stop you from trying. Sophie thought about that. She'd always assumed famous people were confident all the time. That they never doubted themselves or worried about what others thought. The difference between people who succeed and people who don't isn't talent, Keanu continued. It's not even luck, really. It's whether you're brave enough to try even when you're scared. And Sophie, you're already brave. You came here today. You drew in public. You kept creating even after those jerks tried to tear you down. I wanted to leave, Sophie admitted. I almost did. But you didn't. That's what matters. A young couple at a nearby table had been trying not to stare, but finally the woman gathered her courage and approached. She looked nervous, twisting her hands together. I'm so sorry to interrupt, she said, looking at Keanu. But I just wanted to say that what you did was amazing. My little brother has autism and he gets bullied sometimes. I wish more people would stand up for him the way you stood up for her." Keanu stood and shook her hand. "Thank you for telling me that. And I hope you know that you can be that person for your brother. You don't have to be famous or special. You just have to care enough to say something." The woman nodded, tears in her eyes. Then she turned to Sophie. "And your art is beautiful. I saw your sketchbook from over there. You're really talented." Sophie felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you," she said quietly. After the woman returned to her table, Sophie looked at Keanu with wonder. "Does that happen a lot? People coming up to you?" "Yeah, pretty often," Keanu said, sitting back down. "But today it's different. Today they're not just seeing a guy from movies. They're seeing what happened here. And I think that matters more." Sophie took a sip of her latte, thinking, "My mama always says that one person can make a difference. That even small acts of kindness ripple out like waves in water." "Your mama is a wise woman," Keanu said. "Is she the one who encouraged your art?" "She encouraged everything," Sophie said, her voice full of love. "When I was little, some doctors told her I wouldn't be able to do much, that I'd need help my whole life. But she didn't listen to them. She taught me to read, to cook, to take the bus by myself. She always believed I could do more than people expected." "She sounds incredible." "She is," Sophie agreed. "She works 2 jobs to take care of me and my little brother. She gets tired, but she never complains. And every Sunday we have pancake breakfast together and talk about our week." Keanu smiled at that image. "That's beautiful. Family traditions like that, they're what life is really about. Not money or fame or any of that stuff. Just moments with people you love." They talked more about families, about childhood memories, about favorite foods and movies. Keanu told her about traveling for films, and Sophie told him about the furthest she'd ever been from home, which was a trip to the Grand Canyon with her mom last year. "I want to travel more," Sophie said. "I want to see the ocean. I've never seen the ocean in real life." "You live in Los Angeles and you've never seen the ocean?" Keanu asked, surprised. Sophie shook her head. "We don't have a car, and the bus doesn't go to the good beaches. Plus, my mom works so much." Keanu was quiet for a moment, and Sophie wondered if she'd said something wrong. But then he smiled in a way that made her think he was planning something. "Well, that's something we need to fix," he said, but didn't explain further. More people in the cafe were definitely watching now. Some were taking pictures but trying to be discreet about it. Sophie noticed a few people on their phones, probably posting on social media about seeing Keanu Reeves at a cafe. "Does it feel weird?" Sophie asked. "Having people always watching you?" "You get used to it," Keanu said. "Besides, I'd rather have people watching us having a nice conversation, than watching those guys being jerks. At least this way, maybe someone sees that being kind is cooler than being cruel." Sophie liked that idea, that maybe someone watching would learn something good from today. The sun had shifted in the sky, casting longer shadows across the patio. Sophie glanced at her phone and realized she'd been talking with Keanu for almost an hour. Her shift at the bookstore started in 90 minutes. "I should probably go soon," she said reluctantly. "I have work." "Of course," Keanu said. "I don't want to make you late. But before you go, would you do me a favor?" "What kind of favor?" Sophie asked. "Would you let me take a picture with you? Not for social media or anything like that. Just for me, so I can remember today and the talented artist I met." Sophie's heart soared. "You want a picture with me?" "I'd be honored," Keanu said, and he sounded like he really meant it. Sophie nodded eagerly. Keanu waved over the waiter and asked if he'd mind taking a photo. The waiter looked like he might pass out from excitement but managed to hold the phone steady. They stood together, Sophie holding her sketchbook, both of them smiling genuine smiles. Not the fake ones people do for cameras, but real happiness captured in a moment. "Perfect," the waiter said, taking several shots to make sure they got a good one. Keanu looked at the photos and showed them to Sophie. In the picture, she looked happy. Not like someone who'd been crying an hour ago. Not like someone who'd been bullied and humiliated. Just happy. "Can you send that to me?" Sophie asked shyly. "Absolutely," Keanu said, and they exchanged phone numbers. As Sophie gathered her sketchbook and empty latte cup, preparing to leave, Keanu stood up too. "Sophie," he said seriously, "I want you to promise me something." "Okay," she said, wondering what it could be. "Promise me you won't let what happened today stop you from being yourself. Don't let those guys make you scared to come back here to draw in public, to take up space in the world. You belong here just as much as anyone else. Sophie felt tears prick her eyes again, but she blinked them back. "I promise," she said. "Good," Keanu said warmly. "Now go show that bookstore how lucky they are to have you." Sophie practically floated down the street toward the bookstore. Her feet touched the pavement, but she felt like she was walking on air. The sketchbook tucked under her arm felt lighter somehow, even though it weighed the same as it always did. She kept replaying the afternoon in her mind. The way Keanu had stood up for her, the way he'd actually wanted to see her art, the way he'd talked to her like she was just another person, not someone to pity or mock or treat differently. When she arrived at the bookstore, her coworker Danny was already there, restocking the mystery section. He looked up when the door chimed and grinned at her. "Hey, Sophie, you're glowing." "Good afternoon." "The best," Sophie said, and she couldn't keep the smile off her face even if she'd tried. She wanted to tell him everything, but she also wanted to keep it close to her heart for a little while longer, like a secret that was just hers. So instead she just said, "I had a really good latte and worked on my art." Danny gave her a thumbs up and went back to his books. Sophie tied on her apron and started her shift, but her mind kept drifting back to the cafe, to Keanu's words, to the promise she'd made. That evening, when her shift ended and she got home, her mother was in the kitchen making dinner. The smell of rice and beans filled their small apartment warm and familiar. "Mija," her mother called out when she heard the door. "How was your day?" Sophie set down her sketchbook and walked into the kitchen. Her mother turned from the stove, took one look at her daughter's face, and smiled knowingly. "Something happened," her mother said. It wasn't a question. And then Sophie told her everything. About the bullies, about the tears, about feeling small and helpless. Her mother's face grew stern, angry on her daughter's behalf. But then Sophie told her about Keanu, about how he'd defended her, about their conversation and the photo and the promise. By the time she finished, her mother had tears streaming down her face. "Mama, don't cry," Sophie said, though she was crying too now. "These are happy tears." "Baby," her mother said, pulling Sophie into a tight hug. "Happy tears because someone saw my beautiful daughter the way I see her, the way the world should see her." They held each other in that kitchen, the rice forgotten on the stove, just being grateful for the kindness of a stranger who'd changed their day. Later that night, after dinner, Sophie's mother posted something on social media. She didn't use Keanu's name at first. She just wrote about how a kind stranger had defended her daughter from bullies, had treated her with dignity and respect, had reminded them both that good people still existed in the world. The post got a few likes from friends and family. Sophie's aunt commented with heart emojis. Her cousin wrote, "That's beautiful." But then, a few days later, something unexpected happened. Sophie was at the cafe again, at her usual table. She'd kept her promise to Keanu. She came back. She brought her sketchbook. She refused to let those bullies take this space away from her. This time she was drawing a flower, a rose she'd seen in the park on her way over. She was so focused on getting the petals right that she didn't notice the woman approaching her table until she spoke. "Excuse me, are you Sophie?" Sophie looked up to find a woman in her 30s holding a phone. For a second, Sophie's stomach dropped. Was this going to be another bad experience? But the woman was smiling warmly. "Yes," Sophie said cautiously. "I saw your mother's post," the woman said, "about what happened here last week. And I just wanted to tell you that your story inspired me. Yesterday I saw someone being harassed on the bus, and instead of looking away like I normally would, I spoke up. Because of you. Because of what you went through and how you came back here anyway." Sophie felt her eyes widen. "Really?" "Really," the woman confirmed. "You're braver than you know. Thank you for sharing your story." After the woman left, Sophie sat there in stunned silence. Her story had inspired someone. Her worst moment had somehow helped another person be braver. Over the next few weeks, more people reached out. Her mother's post had been shared and shared again. Someone had figured out that the kind stranger was Keanu Reeves, and the story started spreading further. A local news station even contacted them, asking if they'd be willing to do an interview. Sophie was terrified at first. She didn't like being the center of attention. But her mother reminded her of what Keanu had said, about how sharing what happened might help other people. So Sophie agreed. The interview aired on a Wednesday evening. Sophie sat on her couch with her mother, watching herself on TV talking about bullying, about Down syndrome, about how one person's kindness could change everything. Her phone started buzzing with messages. Friends from the bookstore, old classmates, people she hadn't heard from in years, all reaching out to say they'd seen the interview, that they were proud of her, that her story mattered. But the message that made her cry came from an unknown number. "Sophie, I saw your interview. You were amazing. Keep creating, keep being brave, and don't forget about the ocean." Kay, she knew immediately who Kay was. Keanu had been watching. He'd remembered her. He'd remembered their conversation about wanting to see the ocean. Sophie showed her mother, who laughed through her own tears. "That man," she said, shaking her head in wonder. "He's an angel." The story didn't end there, though. A week after the interview, Sophie received a package at her door. Inside was a beautiful set of professional art supplies, pencils and papers and tools she'd only dreamed of owning. The card attached said simply, "For the artist. May your talent take you everywhere you want to go." There was no signature, but Sophie knew she used those supplies to create her best work yet, a series of drawings showing kindness in everyday moments. A stranger helping someone carry groceries, a child sharing a toy, someone standing up to a bully. Her mother helped her create social media accounts to share her art. People started following her, commenting on her posts, asking if she sold prints. Sophie was amazed. People actually wanted her art. 3 months after that day at the cafe, Sophie sold her first drawing. Then another. Then 5 more. She wasn't getting rich, but she was making money from something she loved, something she'd been told she might never be able to do. She kept going to the cafe every week. Sometimes people recognized her from the news story. Most times they didn't. But every single time she drew, she created, she took up space in the world, just like Keanu had told her to. One afternoon, almost 6 months after everything happened, Sophie was at her usual table when her phone buzzed. It was a message from Keanu. They'd texted a few times since that first day, nothing major. Just him checking in and her sending him updates about her art. But this message was different. "Are you free this Saturday? I have a surprise for you." Sophie's heart raced as she typed back. "Yes, what kind of surprise?" "The kind with sand and waves." "Bring your sketchbook. You're going to need it." Sophie read the message 3 times before it sank in. The ocean. Keanu was taking her to see the ocean. She jumped up from her table, startling the people around her, and actually squealed with joy. People stared, but Sophie didn't care. Let them stare. Let them watch her be happy. That Saturday, true to his word, Keanu picked up Sophie and her mother in his car. They drove to the coast to a beautiful, quiet beach away from the tourist crowds. Sophie's first view of the Pacific Ocean took her breath away. The water stretched out forever, blue and vast and more beautiful than any picture she'd ever seen. The sound of the waves was like music. The smell of salt air filled her lungs. "What do you think?" Keanu asked, watching her face. Sophie couldn't speak. She just nodded, tears running down her cheeks for the 100th time since meeting this impossibly kind man. Her mother took photos while Sophie and Keanu walked along the beach. Sophie collected shells, drew the waves in her sketchbook, and laughed as the water touched her toes for the first time. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in oranges and pinks, Sophie turned to Keanu. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. For that day at the cafe, for this, for seeing me." Keanu smiled. "Thank you, Sophie, for reminding me why kindness matters, for being exactly who you are, for showing the world that one moment of courage can change everything." They stood there on the beach, the waves rolling in, the sun setting behind them. Sophie thought about how different her life was now compared to 6 months ago, not because of fame or attention, but because one person had chosen kindness when they could have chosen silence, and she promised herself that she would do the same. That whenever she saw someone being hurt or excluded or treated unfairly, she would remember this feeling. She would remember that one person really could make a difference, because someone had made that difference for her. The waves kept rolling in, steady and eternal, carrying her story out into the world like a message in a bottle, a reminder that kindness ripples outward, touching lives in ways we might never fully know, but always, always mattering.